Welcome back, listeners, to Sandman Stories Presents, a folklore podcast where I read you to sleep or until the next story. I'm your host, Dustin. Today we are back in the book of Turkish folklore written down by Ignacz Kunos. If you are new to this podcast, a Peri is a magic spirit, somewhat akin to a fairy. Today we have the story of the crow Peri, which follows a young man who follows in his father's footsteps and joins his profession. Will there be a happily ever after? Let's find out. Okay, let's begin. The Crow Peri. There once was a man who had a son. The son spent the whole day in the woods catching birds which he sold. One day the father died, and the boy was left alone in the world. He did not know what his father's occupation had been, until one day, looking through his father's things, he found a bird trap. Picking it up, he went to the forest and set it in a tree. Soon a crow flew by and landed on the tree and was caught. The boy climbed up and was about to seize the bird when it begged him to set it free in exchange for a much more beautiful and more valuable bird. It pleaded so earnestly that at length the boy liberated it. He set the trap again and sat down at the foot of the tree to wait. Very soon another bird flew to the tree and was caught in the trap. The boy was astonished at its beauty. Never in his life had he seen such a lovely bird. Looking at it from all sides, he caressed it, and was about to carry it home, when the crow flew near him and said, "Take this bird to the Padishah, he will buy it." So the boy put the bird in the cage and took it to the palace. On seeing the beautiful little creature, the Padishah was so pleased that he gave the boy more gold than he knew what to do with. The bird was placed in a golden cage, and the Padishah amused himself with it day and night. The Padishah had a Lala who was envious of the boy's fortune, and racked his brains to think of a plan for depriving him of it. One day he went to the Padishah and said, "How beautiful this bird would look in an ivory kiosk." "But, Lala," answered the Padishah, "where could I get enough ivory?" "He who brought you the bird can also bring you the ivory," said the crafty Lala. The Padishah sent for the birdcatcher and commanded him to bring enough ivory to build a kiosk for the bird. "But, Padishah," protested the youth, "where can I get so much ivory?" "That is your business," answered the king. "I will give you 40 days to collect it. If it is not here by that time, I'll cut your head off." In deep trouble, the youth left the monarch's presence. While he was absorbed in thought, the crow appeared and asked him the cause of his grief. The birdcatcher told the crow what misfortune the little bird had caused him. "Worry not," returned the crow, "but go to the Padishah and ask him for 40 wagons of wine." The youth went to the palace and obtained the wine. As he was coming away with it, the crow flew up and said, "Near the forest are 40 drinking troughs. All the elephants come there to drink. Go and pour the wine into the troughs, and then, when all the elephants are lying stupefied on the ground, cut off their tusks and take them to the king." The youth followed the crow's instructions and took the 40 wagons loaded with ivory back to the palace. The king was so delighted with the quantity of tusks that he rewarded the birdcatcher lavishly. The kiosk was soon built, and the bird was put in it. The beautiful creature hopped about joyously in its new home, but it did not sing. "If its master were here," suggested the wily Lala, "it would have the desire to sing." "Who knows who its owner was and where he can be found?" answered the king sadly. "He who brought the ivory can surely discover the owner of the bird," said the Lala. So the Padishah called the youth and ordered him to find out who the former owner of the bird was. "How should I know who its owner was?" said the birdcatcher. "I caught it in the forest." "That is your problem," returned the king. "If you do not find him, you shall be put to death. I'll give you 40 days to find him." The youth went home and wept most bitterly. But the crow appeared and asked why he cried. The poor youth told his story. "That trifle is not worth so many tears," replied the crow. Go immediately to the king and request a large ship, large enough to accommodate 40 maidens, with a garden and a very beautiful bath on board." The birdcatcher went to the Padishah and told him what was required for the voyage. The ship was built according to his wishes. The youth climbed aboard, and while he was considering whether he should set sail to the right or to the left, the crow once more appeared. "Always sail to the right," he instructed, "and don't stop until you come to a very high mountain. At the foot of this mountain dwell 40 Peris. When they see your ship, they will all desire to inspect it. However, you must only let the queen come on board, for she is the owner of the little bird. While you are showing her the ship, set sail and do not stop again until you arrive home." So the youth sailed away in his ship, always sailing to the right until he reached the mountain. There on the shore the 40 Peris were taking a walk, and as soon as they spied the ship, they wished to inspect it. The queen begged the birdcatcher to let them see the interior of the vessel, as they had never seen a ship before. Only the queen was permitted to come on board, and a rowboat was sent to the shore to fetch her. The fairy was delighted with the beautiful ship. She walked across the deck, promenaded in the garden, and seeing the bath exclaimed, "Since I am here, I will also bathe." So she went into the bath, and while she was there on the ship, they set sail. By the time the Peri had finished her bath, the ship was already far out at sea. Hurrying onto the deck, she saw that they were almost out of sight of the land, and broke into loud cries of despair. What would happen to her? Where were they taking her? The youth, hoping to console her, told her that she was going to meet some good people and go to a royal palace. Soon they reached the town where the ship had set out from, and the Padishah was told of the vessel's safe arrival. The fairy was brought to the palace, and when she passed the bird's kiosk it began to sing so ravishingly that everyone hearing it was enraptured. The fairy was now more at ease, and she was completely reassured at meeting the Padishah, who admired her so much that he was unable to take his eyes off of her. The marriage of the Padishah to the fairy took place soon afterwards, and the king was now the happiest man in the world. But the Lala was bursting with rage. One day the queen was taken very ill. The medicine that would cure her illness was at home in the fairy palace, and the Lala promptly advised that the birdcatcher should be sent to fetch it. Accordingly he embarked, but when he set sail, the crow appeared and inquired where he was bound. The youth replied that the queen was ill, and that he was going to her fairy palace to fetch her medicine. "You will find the palace on the other side of the mountain," said the crow. "2 lions guard the door. Take this feather with you, and if you stroke their lips with it, they will do you no harm." The youth accepted the feather and set sail. Casting anchor before the mountain, he soon saw the palace. He went up to the entrance where the 2 lions stood, and when he stroked their lips with the feather, they withdrew. The fairies, seeing the young man, suspected that their queen was ill, so they gave him the medicine and he returned home without delay. As he entered the Peri's apartment with the medicine, the crow alighted on his shoulder, and thus they both stood before the patient. The queen had already nearly expired, but the moment she took the medicine, she revived. Opening her eyes and seeing the birdcatcher with the crow upon his shoulder, she addressed the latter and said, "You hateful bird, have you no pity for this poor young man, that you have caused him so much suffering?" Then the queen told her husband that this crow had once been her fairy servant, whom she changed into a crow as punishment for her negligence. "But now," said she, addressing the bird, "I pardon you, seeing that you still love me." On this the crow shook itself, and behold, a lovely maiden stood before the birdcatcher. In accordance with the queen's wish, the king gave the crow Peri in marriage to the birdcatcher. The false Lala was dismissed from his post, and the young birdcatcher was made vizier. Thus they all lived happily ever after. The end. Wow, this story very much rhymes with the Armenian story of just a month ago. Of course, this happens when cultures have contact with one another, and it also has a bit of a fish Peri story from Turkey. And I like how this story came to an end with no one but the jealous Lala losing his job. It was a fun story, and I look forward to many more. And as I still have 28 more stories from this book, I might finish it sometime around in the 2030s. And the podcast shoutout is to the Egyptian History Podcast. This is a wonderful podcast hosted by Dominic, and it showcases the long and storied history of Egypt, just like it says on the tin. You get so much information about the houses, the people, the culture, the accurate pronunciations of the Egyptian pharaohs' names and their meanings. This podcast is so much fun that I highly recommend it, especially if you had a whole Egyptian obsession when you were a kid. So go and give a show a listen, a rating, and a review. And the listener shoutout is to Johor Bahru, Malaysia. Google did a great job of summing up this city, that it is just outside of Singapore, so here's what they said. Johor Bahru, capital of the Malaysian state of Johor, sits at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula. With a causeway across the Straits of Johor connecting it to Singapore, it's a gateway for exploration of that island nation. On Johor Bahru's waterfront is Istana Besar, a royal palace built by the Sultan Abu Bakr in 1866 that now houses the Royal Abu Bakr Museum. And I would love to go and visit there and Singapore one day. So to my listener in Johor Bahru, I say, Terima kasih dan selamat malam. Thank you and good night.